My name is Lois Harder, and I am the principal of the Peter Lougheed Leadership College, as well as being a professor of political science, which is especially exciting for me tonight and in this election season. So as we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. Reconciliation should be a central concern for 21st century leaders. And so territorial acknowledgement is one small gesture in that important project. I also want to thank our sponsor, Syncrude, for supporting these lectures and by extension, leadership development here at the University of Alberta. Established in 2015, the Peter Lougheed Leadership College aims to be an interdisciplinary center for conversations about leadership and to equip University of Alberta students, faculty, staff, and community members with the knowledge, skills, and experiences that will enable them to lead. Our programming prepares participants to engage with diverse people and ideas and supports and builds leadership capacity. Programming at the PLLC includes undergraduate courses and a certificate program, teaching and leadership development workshops for graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, leadership development collaborations across campus and with the Government of Alberta, and of course, this fantastic lecture series. For those of you who are regular attendees of the series, you will notice a few changes this year. First, the lecture series is now a standalone event rather than being integrated into one of our courses. This new structure is going to give us a couple of opportunities in the year ahead to directly engage you in developing your leadership skills with some hands-on workshops, either preceding or following at least two of the lectures. So currently we've got something planned around digital leadership and something around intergenerational leadership. So that could be about family businesses, but it's also about millennials and Gen Xers and boomers all in the same workplace together. So anyway, stay tuned for all of that. We've also organized the lecture series this year around a theme: what's next for Alberta? With a new provincial government and an upcoming federal election, intensifying pressure to address climate change and diversify Alberta's economy, a moral obligation to take up the TRC's calls to action, and a series of transformations, technological, generational, organizational, the series invites people to grapple with pressing issues and debates. We hope it will challenge your thinking and motivate you to make positive change in your community. I do have a couple of bits of other business before we get to the matter at hand. First of all, I want to thank everyone who made a donation to the campus food bank this evening. And if you did not bring a non-perishable food item, we certainly invite you to donate online. During the address tonight, we ask that you do not take any audio or video recordings. The lecture will be recorded and available to the public on our website. And our next lecture will be Thursday, October 10th at 6:30, and it is entitled Food 5.0, How We Feed the Future, featuring Robert Sake. So tonight, we are thrilled to have Francine Pelletier with us to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly, Alberta, Quebec, and the federal election. Now, there is nothing like a fixed election date to make a certain prescience in event planning. You have no idea how excited I was yesterday when the election was called. Ooh, look at me. Yeah, very good. So, Francine Pelletier has been a journalist for over 30 years. In the 1980s, she co-founded and served as editor-in-chief for the monthly women's magazine La Vie en Rose. She then took on a weekly column of social and political commentary for Montreal's largest French daily, La Presse, as well as serving as a regular guest on Peter Zosky's Morningside program. She also contributed to CTV's Sunday edition and PBS's The Editors. So proving her mettle in those roles, she then became the co-host of CBC's flagship current affairs program, The Fifth Estate, work for which she received many awards, including 2 Geminis and a Best Human Relations Award from the New York Documentary Festival for the program Legacy of Pain. an examination of the 1989 Montreal massacre. In the spring of 2001, Pelletier began a new career as an independent documentary filmmaker and screenwriter. She has subsequently created over a dozen documentaries. Then in January 2013, Pelletier took up a weekly column again, this time for the Quebec newspaper Le Devoir, and she has been teaching in the journalism program at Concordia University since 2015. You might also be interested to know that Francine is a U of Alberta alumnus. She has a master's degree in English literature from our esteemed institution. Yay! So, I am especially thrilled that Francine was able to join us for this talk, as I have been a huge fan throughout my adult life. I have long admired her intelligence, insight, and grace. Indeed, she is a role model of courage and principled analysis. I was a young feminist, still a feminist, in 1989 when the Montreal massacre stunned the country. And I remember very well the revelations about the list of feminist targets that the killer had developed, a list that included Francine. Those revelations were horrifying, chilling, and I'm sure they caused a lot of soul searching for prominent women about the potential costs of their public engagement. Now, today, as the election campaign takes off and we are hearing yet again about the kinds of threats that women in the public eye are encountering, Catherine McKenna, for example, it is clear that we still have lots of obstacles to overcome. So I want to commend Francine and other women in prominent public roles for their willingness to make their voices heard, despite the efforts to which some people will go to shut them down. So, let's hear that voice. Tonight we are going to use a kind of fireside chat format. So Francine and I will converse for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. So think along as we chat. So Francine, please join me. All right. Well, welcome, Francine.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's delightful.
It's been a while since I've been on this campus.
Welcome back to Alberta.
Yes, thanks.
So I understand you were a graduate student here in the 70s. Sorry. You were 3 or something, right? Yeah.
I was 20.
Yeah, well, sorry. You're willing to be upfront about that. Okay. So that was obviously a very heady time in Alberta, boom oil time. And in your home province of Quebec, of course, René Lévesque had been elected and sovereignty was on the agenda. So maybe perhaps as a bit of a stroll down memory lane, how would you describe that political moment in Canada?
No, it feels so, well, it feels far away, but I mean, who would have thought then that, 30, 40 years down the road, Alberta would be struggling. I came at a time when the tar sands were just coming in big time. I came to this university partly because the bursaries were really, well, to tell you the truth, I really wanted to go to UBC, which had the only program in creative writing in Canada at that time, and didn't get in, but they told me you should go to U of A, not because they have a lot of money, but because you could then, perhaps it's still the case, you could, if you had the right supervisor, do a creative thesis.
Yes.
Right. So I did come here, which I would not have thought of, the get-go. But for me, it was, first of all, discovering Western Canada for the first time, realizing that Central Canada and Western Canada are very two, worlds apart. But also, it was a time when Alberta was, like I said, was in the boom time. And employment was way down, and there, of course, was no sales tax, and there's still no sales tax. And Quebec was coming in politically. I mean, economically, Alberta was the strong man, and politically, I mean, it was the time when Quebec was, quote unquote, holding the rest of Canada hostage because it was the rise of the Parti Québécois, of independence, the independence movement, but it was also a very heady political time in Quebec, a very heady economic time in Alberta. The two of us, I still think that tension is there. Pragmatism on one hand here, idealism on the other hand in Quebec. But today, Quebec is Alberta is already obviously in a very different situation, but Quebec has not totally changed is perhaps an exaggeration, but no one would have thought 30 years ago that the political party created by René Lévesque would be all but finished. The Parti Québécois almost died in the last provincial election. Mm-hmm. And not only did the political party almost die, independence, of course, is not very strong. But it's not just independence; it's what the whole party represented. It was really the furthering of the Quiet Revolution. It was really the modernization of Quebec. It happened with the Parti Québécois. It was social democracy. It was progressive. It was looking into a better world. And we are now a much more conservative place, which is a bit of a shock to people like me.
Fair enough. So what accounts for that change?
It's both locally. I think we are undergoing what the whole industrial world is undergoing, which is a move to the right, the rise of populism. The new government, it's called La Coalition Avenir Québec, is a party that started only in 2011. Right. Okay, so this is really a new creature, and he's the leader, François Legault, now our premier, was formerly with the Parti Québécois, but he turned his back at one point on independence, and he's very much a pragmatist, not an idealist. He would be quite at home here, I think, actually. And even though he took out, he wanted to wag his finger at Alberta, saying it had dirty oil and stuff. If François Legault was a premier here, he would do exactly the same thing as Jason Kenney, as far as I'm concerned. So it is a move to the right, a move to more to look after more pragmatic things, but it's also an answer to the things that are gnawing away at the United States and throughout Europe, populist, identity. We call them the groupes identitaires, people who are feeling that are very afraid of immigration. Homegrown native sons and daughters who think that things are getting out of hand. All of that is also behind the turn, the political, the different kind of political atmosphere that we're experiencing in Quebec.
Oh, I have a million questions. So one of the things that's happening evidently in this federal election is a kind of unwillingness of the Liberals and Conservatives to really take on the secularism law. So tell me what you make of that, and is that a smart move? Is that not what do we lose or gain by virtue of the two parties not taking that on?
I think the reason we're having, and it could still, we could still see this change, but I was going to say, I think the reason we're having a no-issue election, which makes it not quite as exciting as it might be, is because the issues that are there, i.e. the environment, which is obviously the big issue. It's a huge question, and it is the question of this century, and we have to solve it. But it's a sticky wicket for Andrew Scheer, it's a sticky wicket for Justin Trudeau, apart from Elizabeth May, and it's even a sticky wicket for her because she's proving that she's been so involved with the environment that she might have trouble dealing with other issues, it's turning out. She's having a difficult beginning of this campaign. And so the secular issue is the same thing. Trudeau, I think his instincts, like with the environment, would be to say, we're going to fight this. But if he does that, it's like SNC-Lavalin. He's damned if he does in Quebec and damned if he doesn't in the rest of Canada. He's really between a rock and a hard place. Yeah. So that's why he said what he said. I will not interfere for now. I would be surprised if he does interfere, because you have no idea how popular, unfortunately, this bill is. And I say unfortunately because I've written consistently against it. But the majority of Quebecers are very much in favor of this bill. It was, I think, rather brilliantly. I mean, it's been first of all an issue that's been simmering for a very long time. It started at least around 2005, 2006, where there was a few incidents, very minor incidents, but the media got hold of this. One incident was that. In the neighborhood I live in Montreal, there's a large Hasidic community, and they started complaining about the fact that you could, at the YMCA, you could see the women exercising in the windows. And so they wanted the Y to put Vaseline. Anyways, they didn't want to see the women exercising in the windows. And so the media got hold of this. Mm-hmm. That was one incident. Then there was a judgment that allowed a young Sikh, a young boy who wanted to be able to go to school with his dagger, which is part of, and the court said yes, he was allowed to go. And the media got a hold of that. But it's not so much the media, it's that a politician, a fledgling right-of-center politician, who's no longer a politician, got a hold of this and made a tremendous fuss about it. And we held, in fact, the government at that time, the Liberal government, decided it was holding a commission. It's the Bouchard Charles Taylor Commission. And we heard all about what should we do? Should we accommodate these religious demands from people from religious communities? And then they didn't do anything with the report, and so this thing has been simmering, and with the whole climate, like the larger international climate, which has first of all, Islamophobia with September 11th, which has really turned people against, made people very, very afraid of anything that comes from Islam. That's one thing. It just so happened that Quebec got quite a bit of immigrants from northern Africa, so from the Arab countries, Maroc, Tunisia, Algeria, just at that time, the beginning of this century. So there was an increase of that kind of immigration. There was an increase in fear with September 11th. And of course, you have to realize that Quebec, the most essential thing about Quebec is its survival. I mean, that is, if you want to understand Quebec, you have to understand that Francophone Quebecers are afraid of disappearing. And, I like to quote this because I think it says it well. There's a fairly well-known in Quebec, a novelist who compared Quebec's situation in North America to a cube of sugar beside a gallon of coffee. Well, I know it sounds far-fetched to the rest of Canada, who feels that they've been living with these French Canadians for 300 years and they're still there. But the sense of vulnerability is there. Because it is a bit of a miracle that it has survived. And it has survived for two reasons: because there was a critical mass of people and there was a provincial government that organized around this, and fought for this for the last 100 years. So you put all those things together, and it makes for a very volatile kind of situation. Not a particularly always comfortable one. I mean, I personally don't think that Quebecers are more racist than any other North American or European, but the idea that you could be, invaded or replaced, or the whole idea of disappearing with time is always back there. So in this context where you have, and also the other important thing you need to know to understand this, is Quebec was, of course, a priest-ridden province for so long, right? I mean, that was what the Quiet Revolution was about. We turned the page like overnight. We became a secular province almost. In the space of 10 years, Quebec went from the place, I think, one of the places anyways in the world where women had the most children to the place where they had the least children in 10 years. Yeah. So it was a huge transformation, and the transformation came about by putting religion over here. Right. Religion had to be out of the public sphere. And so this idea of suddenly seeing religion reappear is always is a distressing thought for Francophone Quebecers that it isn't for anyone else. It can feel like a direct threat.
Right. So interesting, right? We've got this situation in which the fear of a religious return is so intense, yeah, but the demise of the PQ, right? So these things feel like they should be together, and yet they're really not.
Yeah, no. The demise of the PQ. What happened to the PQ is that, well, first of all, they were very. I think the other thing you have to know about Quebec to understand it is that Quebec, despite the heady 70s, despite the fact that Quebec held Canada hostage over the idea of separation, Quebecers are not, and this is my own personal view, are not profoundly separatist. They are profoundly nationalist. They want, I mean, the idea of a distinct society, that's what they've always wanted. And it's really unfortunate that Meech Lake did not go through, but that's a parenthesis. The idea that this country was built on two levels. I mean, once the English conquered the French, that it was a bi-national, bicultural, bilingual nation. I mean, at its foundation. For Quebec, it's an important thing to ingrain in the Constitution, to say we will not forget this, but that's all, because I think the other part of Quebecers is that they feel that they helped build this country. Really, I think the first people in Alberta were La Vérendrye and people with the French des coureurs de bois. So they did settle this country, not just in Quebec. And that means something to them. So even René Lévesque was not really, when the first referendum was not about, it was about sovereignty association. It meant just negotiating really a better deal with this recognition. But that didn't happen. And then the Meech Lake went down the tubes. And then the second referendum did not happen either, though it came close because the Quebecers were extremely angry at what happened at Meech Lake. Like, figured they can't even accept that. Well, but it still didn't go through, and that's part of the reason. And I think 1995 is, as of that moment, where the Parti québécois loses it on both its. It had two major aims. The Parti québécois. One was the dream of independence or sovereignty association, call it what you want, and the other was to be a forward-looking progressive. We under René Lévesque, we looked. They completely revamped the political organizations. Corruption was thrown out, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very, very progressive looking. And I think that the seed that grew into the sort of this rather distasteful atmosphere that we're living now was planted the night of the referendum when Jacques Parizeau, quite without thinking, let slip that terrible phrase that is still resounding, why did we lose? Because of money and ethnic votes, which I think started something like that we didn't realize would turn into this kind of like poisonous atmosphere. And it did, I think, the Parti Québécois in. The Parti Québécois slowly but surely became more conservative, slowly but surely lost its ideals and just wanted to keep it power, and therefore started, negotiating and compromising. And they wanted to, in terms of the environment, they weren't at all progressive at one point. And more they became the party that was really open on immigration and open on the world became one of identity politics started creeping in, and it was us against them. It's never presented quite that way, but there is an aspect of that, playing that tune, that it always works with people, when you tell them, you should be afraid of other people. There is a danger there. People respond to that, but it's a double-edged sword. So, yeah.
Okay. So let me circle back to SNC-Lavalin.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we would all really appreciate understanding how that plays in Quebec as opposed to how it plays in the rest of Canada, if you could make sense of that for us, because it is quite different.
Yeah. No, I've written about this too, and and rather on the opposite side of the majority voices in Quebec, but it's much more complicated than it looks. I really think that Quebec is getting a bit of a bad rap on this one, or Trudeau is even getting a bad rap on this one, in the sense that, yes, I think there was definitely pressure put on the former Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould. No doubt undue pressure, too much pressure. But the fact is that I think that Trudeau was paying for his magnanimous move of putting in an Indigenous feminist woman in that post to begin with, which was a tremendous thing for him to do because it was 2015 and everything else. Mm-hmm. But generally, in any other government, you would never have had that dissent. You would have never had that dissent. That's one thing. But the first thing is, and this is why I think we're making judgments without actually knowing what happened. Like, we're acting as if this was totally illegal, but there was the Parliament, not just the Liberals, but Parliament did vote the, remediation agreement, which exists in all kinds of countries in the world, And you can say, and I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm swayed totally by this kind of stuff, but it exists, and it exists for good reasons, which is why should everyone have to pay in a company? Why don't you just get the leaders, the corporate bosses to pay and not have the whole company go down the tube? That's the idea of a remediation agreement. So it's a legal thing, and it was there. What we don't know is why the, what's her name? The person who decides this, who decides if they were going to get a remediation, I forget her name, and her post.
Yes.
But it's a woman.
Department of Justice.
And she decided they were not eligible for this. We do not know why. We have no idea why she decided that, because all that is confidential. And we do not know why Jody Wilson-Raybould decided she was right. We don't know those reasons. So it's a little bit more complicated than it looks. And for Quebecers, even though I think a lot of them saying, well, absolutely, if there was corruption, throw the bums out. But I don't think they want to throw the whole company out. Bombardier, SNC-Lavalin is one of the great companies that built modern Quebec. And it did, there was a whole bunch of bad apples there, but they're technically all been thrown out and stuff like that. I'm not sure that I wouldn't have decided what those women have decided, but I do not have the facts. And no one in Canada has the facts either. That's the thing. So I do believe, when Trudeau says, I had to look at Canadian jobs, I mean, he's right. I mean, he's also saying, what he's not saying is, I also have a lot of votes in Quebec and I have to look after that. Right. And that's true. He will not win this election without Quebec. Pulling his weight as much as possible in Quebec. So obviously was it a conflict of interest? Obviously he was thinking of that, but it's a normal thing for him to think. That's what politicians do. So how he acted was not that abnormal. And in a more normal, shall we say, governmental situation, where you wouldn't have had this outsider as a justice minister, you would never have. It would have never have happened.
Crickets. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So you mentioned briefly about the environment. So obviously, pipelines and the environment are going to be key features in this election. And Premier Legault has been clear on where he sits on pipeline expansion, but I was interested to hear you say that if he was in Alberta, he'd be all for it. So that's interesting. But he has set this very aggressive environmental target, right, for reducing petroleum consumption by 40% or something by 2030.
You're talking about Legault?
Yeah. Which I think is incredibly interesting for a populist party. It's not how any other populist party is talking, right? But anyway, so given that, how do you see the Kenney-Legault relationship shaping up?
Well, first of all, I think that they are we're talking about leaders, I think they are by far the two strongest leaders that Canada has right now. First of all, I've often thought that, there are 3 provinces in this country that have a really strong personality: Quebec, Alberta, and Newfoundland. The only troublemakers amongst those are Quebec and Alberta now. Alberta has become the new troublemaker. If you've noticed, since Meech Lake, we've decided we weren't going to, we weren't going to ask for reforms and new demands and stuff like that. We're just sort of burying our nose, and it's like, as the Bloc would say, mind your own business. We know what we're doing. We know best. So we're doing what we have to do. You do your thing. That has become Quebec's attitude. But François Legault and Jason Kenney are like, I think they are very similar in many ways. They're very wily, charismatic, strategic politicians that know which buttons to play. And when Legault said, "We don't want your dirty oil," he was just pushing a button. He since has more or less excused himself for that. He no longer says that because also he wants to build this corridor up, going from Ontario to Le Saguenay in northern Quebec for gas. So I mean, he's as a classic populist right of center politician. Environmentally, that was the weakest thing in his whole platform. He doesn't have a plan, but he knows how to sing the tune because he knows that Quebecers are, I think, if you believe the polls, the place where they're most concerned and want to do something about the environment. But we haven't done anything, really, apart from imposing quite early on our own carbon tax. But we haven't, we have it, I mean, we always sit back on the fact that we have clean energy. It's the kingdom of hydroelectricity, so we can say, you know, but we haven't really put our money where our mouth is in terms of really investing in green energy and things like that. So I think those two are born to make deals together. The problem is they have two electorates that are very opposite. You know, like Kenny knows he has to sell his pipelines and his oil, and Legault knows that there's no, as he says, social acceptability for that. So it's not going to be an easy thing. I don't know how, well, we've seen, you know, Trudeau is really, again, like in an impossible place with that. There's nothing, damned if he does and damned if he doesn't.
Okay, so, you know, it's the very beginning of a 40-day election campaign, so we can't necessarily predict the end, but at the moment, we have a very tight race.
Yeah.
So let's just imagine that we end up with a minority government. So you've already kind of indicated that, well, if Trudeau's reelected, he's in this really difficult place with these two premiers. What if Scheer was elected? What would that look like with those two premiers?
Well, you know, an interesting thing is, despite the fact that we always see Quebec and Alberta as polar opposites, is that since Stephen Harper, well, I mean, Brian Mulroney was, of course, a conservative premier, but he was from Quebec, so and he was really a progressive conservative, so he was a different kind of conservative in many ways, especially as seen in Quebec. But Stephen Harper managed. You know, something that went over, like this is a very strategic thing, and I can see Andrew Scheer using the same tactic, is that for conservatives, it's important to decentralize. So they come in, and it's because of Stephen Harper that there was a recognition in Parliament of Quebec as a nation, la nation québécoise, and Scheer started off his campaign in Quebec and Trois-Rivières yesterday, saying, I need la nation québécoise, you know. And so he's playing that card. And because of Stephen Harper, the Conservatives actually made inroads. I mean, after losing so many under Brian Mulroney, but I mean, the Conservatives after Mulroney were nowhere in the province. And then, of course, there was the Orange Wave in 2011. But Stephen Harper managed to get around Quebec City in certain places. Not at all in Montreal, but and so right now I think they have 11 seats. But the NDP, who had almost, you know, swept the province, 59 out of 75 seats in 2011, now have 14. Right. So there's a good, and the NDP is dead in the water. It's heartbreaking actually. Yeah. But they're dead in the water. They're not going to. If they manage to hold on to 2 seats out of those 14, I'll be. You know, one is sure, and the others are not sure at all. So the Conservatives could gain a few seats. The problem is in Quebec, we have so many parties. We have 6. We have more than that. We have Bernier and we have the Bloc. And so the split favor is good for the Liberals because it's more widely distributed than the Conservatives. So that will help the. But I think I don't think Scheer. He's still an unknown quantity, not just in Quebec, but and I don't think he impresses a whole lot of people. And he comes across, you know, his very pragmatic, vote for me, more money in your pocket. Right now, actually, Quebec it's the opposite of in the 70s. We've never had this as low unemployment in Quebec as we do now. It's an all-time low. The economy is doing rather well. Things are coming up roses, more or less, financially at least. So there's a recession on the horizon, but no one really feels it, so that's not going to be an issue. So I don't see what Andrew Scheer has to sell, really. And since people are not angry, I mean, the irony with Justin Trudeau is that, you know, the one thing that Alberta and Quebec shared in the 70s, we hated Pierre Trudeau to right. Yeah. We hated him tremendously, both of us. But, and Justin has inherited the mantle of the father.
Provinces, right?
Yes, and so we don't really, we see him as, with great suspicion. But at the same time, because he is also a native son, and because for the longest time federally there was no, you know, the Conservatives was a non-entity, and the NDP was seen as something totally foreign to Quebec until Jack Layton. And so there was nowhere else to go but the Liberals, you know? Right. And that's where the Bloc came in, of course. But since the Bloc is going to gain seats, I think, this time around, but not tremendously. So Justin, till further notice, is our man.
Interesting.
But it's a minority government. There's no way that either of those two can pull off a majority. But my money would be on a minority Liberal government.
Okay, you heard it here. So we'll come back. We'll play this for you in 40 days.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. So just before I open it up to questions, I just want to ask, you know, here we are in social media land and Russian bots, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we began by talking about the 1970s in Alberta and Quebec and what politics sort of felt like then. And now we're in a really a different context in many ways, but also fueled by a very different way of talking about politics and thinking about how we have public discourse. So it does feel like people are very cynical about our political leaders and what's possible, and we may blame that on social media. I don't know, do you blame that on social media? Or what do you think helps to explain, you know, our sort of despondency with contemporary politics?
Well, I do think that social media, I mean, social media has, certainly in terms of traditional media, which I'm part of, it has been, people really underestimate the impact that it has in terms of forcing traditional media to just stay alive. It's huge, you know. There's a great book, if for anyone who's interested in the media, by the former editor of my favorite newspaper, or one of my two favorite newspapers, The Guardian, Alex Runsbridge, I think, and he talks about how he was at the helm when they had to go through the whole social media and how they adapted to that, and it's called The Remaking of Journalism Today and Why It Matters. And he says something which is, I think, just says it all for me, saying how for 300 years, since the beginning of newspapers and media, you had one model, you know, it was a little club of people who decided every day what people were going to read, and, you know, they lobbed their newspaper over into your yard, and that's it, and that's how you were informed. And now it's the club versus the mob. Now it has become everyone wades in, and everyone has its say. And of course, with the problems, I mean, it's much more democratic in a way. There's much more input, but at the same time, the problems of having no control, of fake news, of you name it. And trying to keep that, apart from just the problem of losing all your ads, because the other model that kept newspapers going for 300 years is that you had ads. And it's not people paying their 25 cents that kept the papers. It was the ads. And now all the ads have gone to the social media, so it's... Anyway, social media has brought a certain amount of cynicism and second thoughts about institutions, but I think it's much wider than that. And you just have to look, I mean, like for me, the election of Donald Trump is still something like the September 11th that I am not getting over, you know. Mm-hmm. Like, what that means, and Donald Trump is not just one weird, you know, Agent Orange that has, somehow got elected and will disappear and we'll never talk about him again. He is making a huge impact, and it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, it's happening in Europe in all kinds of ways. But the idea that these institutions, like what we built after the Second World War, the charters of rights and all the international institutions, from commerce to you name it, the United Nations, that keep us on the proper keel and gives us principles and gives us values. All that is being eaten away by people like Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump, Salvini and Orban and you name them.
Boris Johnson.
Yes, and Boris Johnson. And so we're lucky in Canada in the sense that, and people look at us and say, oh, there's still Canada, Mm-hmm. And I do believe that we're a cut above, but not completely. I mean, we're undergoing a certain dismantling and a certain gnawing at, we don't trust our institutions and our leaders, and this whole idea of, this populism that says, the elite are all corrupt, and all of that is we can't trust, and this kind of mentality that, the mob mentality is very disquieting, I find.
Yeah. I mean, that seemed to be the great hope of Justin Trudeau in 2015, right? The sunny ways.
Yeah.
We'll all do that, and yet.
Well, we realize that the sunny ways is really a bit artificially rosy, that mm-hmm. He was really, and this is what he's good at. I mean, I think we've got his number. He's a great brander. He's good at the brand, It's idealism, but without really a lot of substance. It's, as much as Scheer is vote for me, vote for the economy, Justin is vote for the gentler, kinder Canada, vote for like the so-called future, but it has really no meat on that bone. And that's the problem. There's not that much substance to the brand as far as we can see. But we don't have a whole lot of alternatives.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure you're all thinking all kinds of thoughts and lots of questions, so I will open the floor to people's engagement. I'll ask you to keep your remarks fairly short, not too much extemporizing, and maybe we'll collect up a few questions. Yeah. We'll just, this purple box, if you haven't seen it before, is a microphone, and you can just throw it.
Wow. Never seen that.
How close? Like this?
Yeah.
You had mentioned Quebec having the us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
With pipelines, with various sundry other things. Do you see Alberta having that same syndrome now?
In terms of the rest of Canada, or who is the us and the them in your mind?
The similar us to what it was in Quebec. Now the other provinces aren't playing the same game.
Well, yes, I think Alberta is taking the mantle a little bit of, we have demands now. We are the distinct place now, and they're not getting, just like Quebec was not getting a lot of sympathy back then from the rest of Canada, Alberta's not getting a lot of sympathy from the rest of Canada, not until you bring on the sales tax anyway. So I think there is a little bit of that, but it goes back. I mean, there has always been in Alberta us versus central Canada. That was one of my revelations when I first came here back then, is I had no idea how much there was this, we're not like you guys back there, and it's true. There was a newness. I realized what that meant, the new frontier, like still building this place. You didn't feel like that in central Canada. But that's an old tension. I'm not sure it's a new tension. If you're asking me, well, first of all, I don't know how your rapport to immigrants. I mean, one of the reasons Alberta is still in a good financial place is because you've attracted a lot of immigrants. It's no longer the frontier. And how you feel about that, I have no idea. If it's easygoing, if it's everyone's welcome and it creates no tension, all the better. But I think that even though it's interesting that the polls, the media are unanimous, and the politicians are unanimous to say, that in the rest of Canada, everyone is welcome, and it's a multicultural society and stuff. But when you poll people, even in the rest of Canada, there's the assent, the agreement of ordinary Canadians with Bill 21, with the fact that people should not wear religious signs, is much higher than what you see in the media or the politicians. So there is a popular, people understand, a lot of people I think understand to a certain, instinctively what that is about, but don't dare talk about it. Like no one, it's amazing how this is something that distinguishes Quebec from the rest of Canada, is that we talk about these tensions openly and get generally wrapped on the knuckles for it. But in the rest of Canada, there's a bigger political correctness that forbids that, I think. And I think that's a bad idea. I think it's always better to let the bad stuff out than keep it in the closet. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not sure I'm the best person who can answer that question.
Okay. You mentioned that many other countries in the world have remediation agreements, yeah. But Canada has the remediation agreement at the instigation of the SNC aristocracy, and it was slipped in as a single clause in an omnibus bill of more than 500 pages. Now, of course, there's no, as you've said, we can't get the information, or we don't have the information and the facts behind the people who were involved in the attempt at using the remediation agreement. Why is it we can't get that information? Why has a curtain been drawn across the facts?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you that it wasn't done really very, very well. That there was something a little bit fishy of the omnibus bill. I don't know if it's at all fishy though that SNC-Lavalin lobbied for it. I think it's perfectly normal that's what they do, right? All big companies would have done that, and I'm not sure there wasn't a lot of lobbying in other countries before they went through these bills. Why the Liberal government certainly was a mistake was not more forthright about it. Well, I think they were afraid that they would be accused of privilege, favoring Quebec yet again. In fact, I just read before coming here Christy Blanchford's column on the election and saying the reason Trudeau is not going to talk about SNC-Lavalin or the secular bill, Bill 21, is because it's all about giving in to Quebec again. Like this idea is very, very present in the minds of a lot of Canadians. I think that Quebec always gets a favor, gets an easy deal, gets away with things. In Quebec, that's not the feeling they have, And I think a lot of people believe that SNC-Lavalin should pay. But they also probably think it's normal for a prime minister to go to bat for it. So there is always two sides to a story.
Thank you. My question, as a leadership, what will be the 5 years plan? And don't we? And I think that we are too distracted in minuscule issues. So I would like to ask you, when we stop haggling for those centric issues and put forward Canada as one in a global forum?
Yeah.
That is one. And when will our leadership recognize that this nitty-gritty issues can be handled by so many sub-leadership or sub-departmental leaderships, So I would like to know what are the plans for Canada for next 5 years?
At a global level.
Global level.
On a global level.
You get to choose.
Thank you.
Well, I don't, you see, I'm not a politician, so I don't know, but you think, what I think should be the plan for Canada for the next 5 years? I think we would do ourselves and the whole world a big favor if we tried to be a better leader on the environmental issue. I really think we have to stop pussyfooting around with this, It's true that I think Elizabeth May has a point when she says this might be the last election where we can still do something about it. But we really have to do something about it. And the problem is we don't know where to start, There is certainly not enough leadership in terms of really putting your shoulder to the wheel of green energy. There's all kinds of initiatives on this level, but we never hear about it. How much they're funded, we don't know. If you just take recycling, for example, I don't know about you guys in Alberta, but in Quebec, it's a joke. It's a joke. We recycle all this stuff, and it goes into the dump anyway, because we have nowhere, well, especially now that China has shut us down, and we have nowhere to send our stinking garbage ships, We have not even figured out what to do with our garbage. So I think if we could start with the environment, that, for me, that is absolutely a pressing issue. And I agree that a lot of them feel like piddly issues, like my eyes roll when you start reading already, okay, today I think Justin Trudeau promised, what was it?
Home buyers.
Package
thing.
Right. So we're going to get that. We're going to get another little, this for you and that for you. And personally, I feel like saying, who cares? Perhaps he thinks he's going to get, individual people like that. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Unfortunately, I do believe that this, I think someone in the Globe and Mail wrote about this week. I do think that this issue, that's a non-issue, because no one is going to take the environment and really run with it. I mean, no one that can really run with it is going to do it. I think it is, we're looking at a kind of culture war, is that we have, it's about who is Andrew Scheer, the kind of values, the guy from he's not even from out west, but anyways, we say the guy from Saskatchewan who's very religious and who knows what he's going to do with abortion, and Trudeau, who's the progressive darling of the world. And it's really about these two value systems, but just images, really. That's all we have to go on for in terms of making a choice for now. I don't think that anything that they can say about more money in my wallet or home buyers or infrastructure money or it will do it for me, sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm afraid I can't really go much farther than that.
Francine, thanks for coming. I appreciate your perspective. My question is about ex-Attorney General Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould. And in May, she got kicked out of the Liberal caucus, and she lost her nomination for the Liberals, and so she's going to run in Vancouver as a independent. Yeah. So what kind of support does she have politically in central Canada?
I think she's seen as an unknown quantity, for one thing. I also think that a lot of people probably have, without saying it out loud, have thought this, is that if it had been, shall we say, a native, indigenous company that was at stake here, would she have gone to bat for them? I mean, I think in Quebec they feel that she had no sensitivity, no sensibility for Quebec. because she comes from the opposite side and stuff like that. At the same time, and I myself wrote about this, it was really heart-wrenching to see that an Indigenous woman, I mean, the two things that Trudeau, his brand anyways, was going for, reconciliation and bringing women in, and he did bring women into cabinet, like suddenly they were, tearing themselves apart. So I do think that bringing in women and other kinds of people in government, to answer your question, Madame over there, that's one of the, I think, is a priority. And in a way, Trudeau did try to do something about that, and it blew up in his face. And it's kind of tragic, actually. And I don't know if I have no idea if she will get elected. I think she has a lot of sympathy generally throughout Canada. I think in Quebec we don't quite know what to do with her because we just don't know enough. Yeah. There's a question up here.
Yeah, it's just a comment. I just wish so much Elizabeth May would run for Liberals. I mean, I admire her. She's a truth teller, you know?
Yeah.
She's smart.
Yeah.
She's got a lot on the go. She's passionate. I just wish that they would get into some of the other issues. You know, they're like a one-issue party, and nobody's going to believe it otherwise unless she, decides that other issues are important too. But she is a smart woman, and I wish that she was in the right party to get elected, because I think she's got a lot of support.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think she's a great politician, a great parliamentarian, smart, very smart, and she's having a real. In fact, she has. They have the wind in their sails, but she's really having trouble with this campaign because of the things she said, and it's partly because they've been this one-issue party, and they have never sort of been able to think outside of that box so much. So I rather agree with you.
Hi, thanks for coming, first of all. I'm an educator. I teach grade 7 to 12 here in the city, and I guess this is one of our first federal elections where we have a lot of post-millennials that are able to vote. Mm-hmm. And I think a really big thing that we notice here in this room is the demographic that's present in this room, and there is a limited of the younger population that comes to these lectures or is engaging. And I'm worried because I know that I hear my students say a lot of times that they feel sometimes their voice is not accounted for, or there's times where they don't know how to advocate their voice, and we as teachers do our best to show them the political process and engage them. But who do you think, in terms of the political parties, is poised the best to engage this new post-millennial crowd and the young voters, which I think a lot of times feel that their voice is discounted or not acknowledged?
Well, last time around, obviously that was one of the things that Justin Trudeau managed, obviously quite effectively, because of his age, because of his energy, because of his image and everything else. How much I think he's now seen by the younger people as just another politician. So I'm not sure he's going to pull in that many. Though you mustn't underestimate the power of image. And he's a great campaigner as well. As he said, he loves to fight he likes to be backed up against the wall. He came through as he was the third party in 2015, and he ended up first. He did the famous boxing thing, which of course made his political career, where he should have lost and he won. So he's going to fight like hell, and I think young people can react to that. I certainly don't think Andrew Scheer has a lot of grasp there, probably. And, well, Elizabeth, perhaps, because I think it is for sure, if there's one thing that young people care about, it's the environment. So perhaps she, and the NDP, well, I don't know what to say about the NDP. I think it's terrible that Jack, I think he's a very courageous man. I don't think he's probably the best politician, but I think he's paying so dearly for his turban that it tears my heart out. He shouldn't have to pay that much.
Yeah. So we'll take these last two questions here.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question about how you would expect Canada to compete in the global market if we don't export our oil internationally and continue to import from other countries. How are we going to pay for all these green projects, and how is this going to happen? What do we see happening in the future?
Well, I'm not an economist and I'm not a politician, so I know that if I was, where Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada, I would have a hell of a problem, which he has illustrated really well, I think, because I think he actually would like to do something for the environment, but also knows that you cannot sacrifice, how did he put it? No country in the world would leave 72 billion, I don't know how much oil there is there, but in the ground. Except that that's what the scientists are telling us we have to do, right? That we have to, I don't think we turn off the faucet from day one, but I don't see, we're supposed to be in transition, but I don't see any transition. Do you see a transition? No. There's no transition.
I was thinking more on a worldwide stage of we're the only ones cutting oil production, and then the other countries are still producing, and we're still importing all their oil.
Well, I think the Scandinavians, God bless them, have sort of showed us the way. I mean, the Norwegians are still exploiting their oil, but have put billions of dollars away, right? They've looked ahead to the future, and I think we Canadians are not responsible for this lack of prescience or lack of our poor ability to look ahead. There's this great quote, where we say human beings always expect tomorrow to be like today until it's not. Like we're sort of like robots, we just say, oh, we'll just keep going and it'll figure itself out. We have no capacity to sort of imagine ourselves way out there in the future and do something about it. It's always day to day. And God knows our politicians are day to day, and that's the reason they bore us, and that's the reason they have a lack of leadership and vision very often. But we have to start thinking that way. And we have to think what it's going to be like. I mean, I'm kind of happy I'm not going to be around in 2050, because it's going to be absolutely, just the summers we've had in central Canada in the last couple of years are quite excruciating. Not to mention all the cataclysms and the wildfires and everything else. So we have to start thinking about it. We have no choice.
In the Constitution, is there any constitutional protections for climate?
I don't think that is part of the Constitution. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It probably will become part of it eventually if we can.
It's just that when you look at the economic benefits and risks, the billions and billions of dollars, sometimes trillions, through climate change from forest fire, let alone the degradation of the climate or the environment, but the damage that the weather changes are doing to farmers and their crops and wildfires. We're talking billions and billions of dollars, and can't they see the benefit and risk of diversifying the economy versus devastating the economy economically through climate change? I don't understand that.
But it's always the same problem, you know. You have to start somewhere, and somewhere means, you know, turning the tap off or making it hard on people right now, which means you're not going to get SNC-Lavalin syndrome. I'm not going to get elected next time if I do that, so I'm not going to do it, you know. It's a catch-22.
This is our last question.
I have two questions. One is with respect to populism. Don't you think the pandering and the political correctness of the political class and the institutions in general has given rise to the populism across the globe? That is the first thing. Pandering means catering to all kinds of needs which are not in the interest of the citizens.
Give me an example.
Pandering is basically unbridled immigration, open borders, okay, or taking care of everybody except the citizens, providing shelters or providing housing and all that when the actual citizens are homeless. That is the kind of pandering that has taken rise to populism across the globe. It is not a one Trump phenomenon, it is happening across the globe. Don't you think it has to do with what the political class or the institutions have done over the years?
I think I'm hearing from you, and this is actually a very interesting theory that's just coming out. He's actually Canadian, I forget his name. He's written a book called White Shift, saying the white majorities have to stop saying that, you know, anyone who is against immigration is a horrible racist and stuff like that. It is normal, that's what you're saying, isn't it? It's normal not to want to be invaded and to lose your identity and all of that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and another thing is Canada is the least racist country I have seen. And at least I have been here more than 2 decades. And to call every average Canadian a racist or something, that is definitely detrimental to the society in general.
Yeah.
And you cannot call everybody who voted against some particular party or a particular person as a racist just because he has a different opinion.
But that, I agree. And I think that comes back to the point I was trying to make earlier, is that political correctness is always a bad idea.
Yes.
It's pretending that we're all, oh yes, we're all on the same page, we all want this, we're all happy and in fact it's much more complicated than that. And it's normal to feel tensions, like I was trying to explain how Quebecers feel. It's normal for us to feel that because of who we are and the history we've gone through. So we have to have an honest conversation, saying, yes, we want immigration, we are a country of immigrants, but we have to decide how we want to do this, you know, fairly, justly, and not just saying, you know, everyone is welcome in Canada. Like we have to have the conversation, which is what I think Quebecer is a little closer to that sometimes. Sometimes, of course, we go to the other side. There's the young, but I think we tend to speak more openly about these things.
What is happening is we are stifling voices by calling people names. We are stifling voices. We are stifling voice of reason. And that is what is actually more detrimental to the society's fabric than encouraging differing opinions. The other point I wanted to bring it about is the 1% wealthy, taxing the wealthy. It has become a privilege for everybody to talk that I want to tax the wealthy. They reached the wealthy status not by sitting idle at home. They worked hard and they reached that stage. But to take it as a privilege that 1% of the wealthy should be taxed like crazy, 70%, 90%, that is not what we should be encouraging.
No, I disagree with you on that one. There are some very interesting studies that show that the more unequal a society is, the more, the harder it is for the whole society on every level. It's not just that the 1% is not paying its fair share of taxes, which I think is one of the reasons why they really should have to pay more taxes. In Quebec, we pay the most taxes of all Canadians, and we actually don't mind it. There's actually a good, and I'm saying this to encourage you guys to accept more taxes. Because we have things to show for it. We have daycare like no one else in Canada. We have anyways, daycare is one example, I don't know, but we know that our taxes go to the common good. And I think that's how you have to think about taxes, and I think it has to be proportional to the people's income. It's not because you made a fortune that you have to, you get a free ride. Au contraire. And also because it does affect the whole structure of society. When there is that, more it is unequal. More there's a small percentage which makes all the money, and there's less and less money here. Everything suffers. Education suffers. Health suffers. Everything suffers. So I don't follow you there.
Okay, so I'm actually going to call this off, but I'm sure there will be an incredible conversation after the fact, because this is very lively and important. So let me thank you so much, Francine, for
Thank you
your
for having
insights and for sharing so generously with all of us.
Thank you.